The year was 1872, and the spring sun hung low over the western plains. Its light filtered through dust that clung to every surface of the small station at Dry Creek. The wooden platform groaned beneath boots and skirts as townsfolk gathered, their voices weaving into a low hum of anticipation. The train's whistle had just faded, leaving behind the metallic scent of steam and the restless shuffling of passengers disembarking. Among them stood a young woman of 27, her carpet bag clutched tight, her posture rigid as if bracing against an unseen storm. Evelina Grace had traveled miles on the hope of a letter, the fragile promise of belonging, only to find herself stripped bare by rejection before she could even take a breath of new air. Her would-be groom, a merchant with a narrow face and calculating eyes, looked her over with the disinterest of a man examining bruised fruit at market. His lips curled, and his voice cut across the platform like a knife. "Not what I was expecting," he muttered loud enough for every ear to catch. He turned on his heel, leaving her standing alone, her cheeks burning as whispers rippled through the crowd. Evelina's fingers trembled around the worn leather handle of her bag. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, tried to keep her chin lifted, but the humiliation was heavier than any trunk she could have carried. Children giggled behind their mothers' skirts. A group of men trading tobacco near the post leaned in to watch, smirking at the scene. And somewhere near the ticket window, Martha Hensley, widowed twice and sharper for it, tilted her head with a smile too sweet to be kind. Evelina caught fragments of their voices. "Poor thing all the way from St. Louis, no family, no dowry." The words clung to her skin, cold and damp. She felt like a stray animal abandoned on the tracks, not a woman who had once dared to dream of a home. Her knees quivered, yet she forced herself upright, every ounce of pride urging her not to collapse. She had endured cruelties harsher than this, nights of hunger, years of loneliness, the cruel hand of fate that stole her parents young and left her to carve out survival alone. Still, nothing prepared her for the sting of being so publicly dismissed, discarded like she was nothing at all. The air pressed heavy with judgment, and she wished desperately for the ground to open and swallow her. From the edge of the platform, a shadow shifted. He had been there all along, unseen by most, a man of such stature and quiet gravity that the crowd unconsciously gave him space. Clint Holloway, 30 years old, stood tall among them, his broad shoulders wrapped in a weathered coat, his face sun-darkened and unreadable. A widower, some whispered, though his fortune and land still made him one of the richest men in the county. He had come to collect supplies, but his eyes, clear and steady as mountain glass, now rested on Evelina. For a moment, time held its breath. The crowd hushed as Clint stepped forward, boots striking wood with unhurried certainty. Evelina felt the weight of his gaze settle over her. Yet unlike the others, it did not strip her bare, did not sneer. Instead, it seemed to anchor her, to say without words that she was seen, not as refuse, but as something still whole. He stopped before her, his height casting her in shadow, and his voice carried, low and firm, across the platform. "She's coming with me." The declaration rang through the station, silencing even the snickers. Martha Hensley's mouth snapped shut. The merchant who had spurned Evelina froze mid-step, but did not dare challenge him. Clint's tone was not a request, nor even an invitation. It was a verdict, one the town could do nothing but accept. Evelina's breath caught. She had not spoken, had not agreed, but something in her chest loosened, a tremor of relief tangled with fear. He reached for her bag without ceremony, lifting it as though it weighed no more than a loaf of bread. Evelina's instinct was to protest, to remind him she was not a parcel to be claimed. But when his hand brushed hers, she felt only steadiness, an assurance she had never known. She hesitated, then allowed him to guide her toward the wagon waiting beyond the platform. Behind them, whispers swelled again. Widower Holloway taking her in? Desperate man, desperate woman. Mark my words, it won't last. Their judgment pressed like thorns, but Clint moved on without flinching. Evelina, half-dazed, followed. The wagon creaked as Clint lifted her bag inside. She climbed up carefully, her dress catching on the splintered wood, and settled onto the bench. The air smelled of horses and sun-warmed leather. Clint took the reins, the leather straps taut in his large hands, and with a click of his tongue, the wagon jolted forward. Dry Creek faded behind them, its gossiping mouths growing smaller until they were no more than faint echoes on the wind. The road stretched wide, bordered by fields of spring grass bending beneath the breeze. Evelina dared a glance at Clint. His jaw was strong, his profile cut by years of labor beneath unrelenting skies. He did not speak, and in that silence lay something steadier than any comfort words could offer. Yet the quiet unsettled her too. Why had he chosen her? What did he see in her that others had not? Her mind spun with fear, yet a strange calm threaded through the storm. Every small sound, the creak of wheels, the steady clop of hooves, the rhythm of his breath, settled into her bones. For the first time in years, she was not running, not begging, not bartering scraps of dignity for survival. She sat beside a man who had spoken into the crowd's cruelty and given her a place, however uncertain. The ranch rose on the horizon hours later, its outline sturdy against the glow of dusk. Fenced pastures rolled wide, dotted with cattle that turned slow heads at their passing. The house itself stood plain but well kept, a testament to discipline and quiet labor. Evelina's throat tightened. She had no claim to this place, yet here she was, carried into its heart. Clint led her inside, his movements deliberate, unshowy. The kitchen smelled faintly of wood smoke and bread gone stale. He pointed her toward a small room off the hall, its bed neatly made, a pitcher of water on the table. The walls were bare save for a shawl folded carefully on a chair, its edges frayed but preserved with reverence. Evelina touched the fabric lightly, sensing a story she had not been told, a life still lingering in these rooms. She thanked him softly, her voice almost swallowed by the hush of the house. He only nodded, then stepped back, leaving her to the stillness. Alone, Evelina sank onto the bed. The weight of the day finally pressed down, and tears slipped free, hot and unbidden. Through the small window, she could see Clint moving across the yard, lighting a lantern that cast a warm circle against the gathering night. He paused once, glancing toward her window as though to check that she was safe. Evelina pressed her hand to the glass, her heart a knot of fear and something else she could not name. She was no longer standing at the station abandoned, no longer shrinking beneath the eyes of strangers. She was here, in a place that might yet become a home or a prison, depending on what tomorrow held. The silence of the ranch wrapped around her, vast and unbroken, leaving her with the unsteady question of whether she had stepped into salvation or another cruelty waiting to unfold. And as the lantern flame outside flickered against the dark, Evelina knew only this: the story of her life had shifted, and she was no longer walking it alone. The mornings at the Holloway Ranch began with birdsong, thin and tentative at first, then swelling into a chorus as the sun crept over the fields. Evelina woke each day to its sound, the light spilling through the thin curtains of her small room, touching the wooden floor with gold. The scent of hay drifted in through the open window, mingling with the faint smoke of the kitchen fire Clint had already stoked before dawn. She rose quietly, smoothing the creases from her plain dress, determined to be useful in a house that was not yet hers. In town, whispers grew sharper. On Sundays, when Clint guided the wagon down the dirt road toward the whitewashed church, Evelina sat beside him, her posture stiff as the stares of the congregation. Women nudged each other, their bonnets tilting like curious birds. Children whispered that she was the orphan bride no one wanted. The words sank like stones in Evelina's chest, yet Clint's silence beside her was an armor. He did not speak, but he walked with her to the church door, his tall frame a shield, his gaze straight ahead. She noticed how his presence cut through gossip, how the same mouths that whispered dared not challenge him aloud. Still, the judgment clung to her like soot she could not wash away. At the ranch, she found small ways to soften the spaces that felt haunted. A vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table, their colors bright against the plain wood. A shirt mended with neat stitches, left folded on Clint's chair. He never commented, yet she saw his eyes linger on the details. Once, he placed a slim book upon the table near her plate at supper, An old psalm book, edges worn soft. Found it in the loft, he said simply. She traced its pages as though they were jewels, and though his words were spare, she understood it was a gift. The house carried ghosts. In the evenings, Evelina noticed the chair in the corner with a shawl still draped across it, never disturbed. Once, she found Clint sitting alone in the barn, his large hands resting on a broken saddle, his face hollowed by grief. She hesitated at the door, then stepped forward, her heart pounding. She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. He did not flinch, nor did he speak, but his head bowed slightly, as though her touch steadied him. In that silence, she felt the ache of his loss, and for the first time, her own loneliness eased. Two wounds touching, neither healed, yet less sharp together. Spring storms rolled across the plains, thunder rumbling like distant drums. One afternoon, Evelina stood in the mercantile, a basket of flour in her arms, when a voice rose behind her. "Stray cat, that one," Martha Hensley sneered, her words sugar-coated with pity. "Picked up by a desperate man who couldn't keep a proper wife." Laughter rippled through the room. Evelina froze, heat flooding her face. For a breath, she considered fleeing, abandoning the basket, and running back to the ranch where only walls and silence judged her. But before she could move, Clint appeared at her side. He took the basket from her arms, his hand brushing hers with steady certainty, and turned his gaze on the crowd. He said nothing, yet the weight of his eyes was enough. The room fell quiet. Even Martha's lips snapped shut, her false smile faltering. Clint's silence was not empty. It carried the unyielding presence of a man who owed no explanation. Evelina's chest swelled with trembling relief. For the first time, she lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. Together they walked from a store, side by side, the basket resting against his arm as though it belonged there. That night, Evelina sat by the fire, her hands clasped tight. "I've been unwanted most of my life," she whispered, the words shaking loose before she could hold them back. Clint sat across from her, shadows playing along the planes of his face. His gaze held hers, steady, patient, never prying. "I don't know what you see in me," she added, her voice cracking, "but I'm afraid of being thrown aside again." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and reached across the small space. His hand closed over hers, large, warm, calloused from work, yet tender in its weight. "I don't make promises easy," he said quietly, "but I don't walk away." Evelina's throat tightened. He had spoken little, but the words felt carved in stone. She clutched his hand, and though neither moved closer, the fire between them glowed brighter. Days bled into weeks, each marked by the rhythm of chores, the hush of evenings, the slow weaving of trust. Evelina found her steps lighter, her laughter rare and soft, returning in slivers. Clint's eyes followed her not with hunger, but with quiet recognition, as though he had been waiting for her all along without knowing it. The town still whispered, but Evelina found herself less shaken, her dignity rooting deeper in the soil of Clint's steadfastness. One morning, Clint guided her outside to the orchard behind the house. The apple trees had erupted in bloom, branches heavy with white blossoms swaying in the breeze. Beneath them stood a minister, his Bible tucked beneath his arm, and two neighbors as witnesses. Evelina's breath caught. She had not expected this, not so soon, yet when Clint turned toward her, holding out his hand, her fear gave way to a trembling certainty. She stepped forward, her dress plain but glowing in the light, her hand sliding into his. The minister's words rose like prayer, the wind carrying petals around them in a soft storm. Clint's vows were simple, his voice low but firm, each word weighted with truth. Evelina spoke hers with tears glistening on her lashes, her voice breaking but steadying with every phrase. When his hands enclosed hers, she felt as though the whole of her fractured life had been gathered and bound into something whole again. The witnesses bowed their heads, and the minister closed his book. Clint bent, pressing his lips to her forehead, a kiss that was both promise and protection. Around them, the orchard whispered in bloom, the blossoms falling like blessings at their feet. Evelina closed her eyes, her heart thundering with the knowledge that she had not been cast aside but chosen, not in pity but in strength. The sun slid lower, painting the horizon in fire, and for the first time, she believed she had a place where dignity could live. Yet even as joy welled in her chest, Evelina felt the fragile thread of uncertainty lingering. What storms might still come, what battles they might face together. She turned her head, resting her cheek against Clint's chest, hearing the steady beat beneath his ribs. And in that sound lay both her salvation and the question that would shape their future. Whether the love born of quiet defiance could withstand the world's judgment, or if it would demand even greater courage than she had yet known.